Have you ever felt a chill run down your spine while jogging? It's not just the cold air. Sometimes the road you run on leads you into a darker place. A place where the path is followed by things you can't see but can feel. In this collection of jogging horror stories, the comfort of a morning run will turn into your worst nightmare. Each story twists the mundane into the terrifying, revealing that the most innocent jogs can lead you into a world where you are the prey, and you can never run fast enough to escape. Jogging. It's a simple, daily routine for most, just a way to get some fresh air, clear the mind, or keep in shape. But what if your daily run is hiding a darker truth? What if each stride you take leads you deeper into something far more sinister than you could ever imagine? The comforting rhythm of your feet against the pavement becomes a heartbeat, your own pulse thundering in your ears, and every shadow that flickers at the corner of your eye feels like something or someone waiting for you. In this collection of jogging horror stories, the simple act of running becomes a descent into the unknown, where every route you take hides an unsettling secret, and no path is truly safe. From eerie figures who seem to follow your every step, to the terrifying realization that you're being hunted by something otherworldly, these stories explore the dark side of exercise, where the line between your own reality and nightmare blurs with every step you take. Have you ever noticed a strange figure lurking just out of sight? Or heard footsteps behind you when you're certain no one's there? These stories will make you question every jog, every run, and every shadow that crosses your path. Whether you're a seasoned runner or just someone out for a casual jog, beware. The road you run on might just lead you somewhere you'll never return from. So, if you dare to continue, hit that play button and let's run, but not alone. Keep your eyes open, because when you step out, you never know what might be waiting. Story number 1. Tom had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, before the sun had fully risen, he laced up his worn-out sneakers, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped outside. The woods behind his house were his sanctuary, a place of peace and stillness that he knew better than the back of his hand. It was the one thing that kept him grounded. His early morning jog through the trees, the mist, the quiet. But this morning was different. Tom couldn't quite place it at first. It was the faintest of sensations, just a ripple in the air, a whisper of something out of place. He pressed on, hoping it was nothing, but his mind couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. He pushed through the familiar path, the trees a blur of shadows in the cool, gray morning. The first time he heard it, he thought it was his imagination. A faint tap, 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 echoing against the earth beneath his feet. A rhythm, a pace, a footstep. That wasn't his. He slowed, instinctively looking over his shoulder. There was nothing but the still mist swirling in the distance, the tall trees like silent sentinels. He shook his head, just the forest playing tricks on him. A squirrel, maybe. Or the wind. But as he sped up again, the sound grew louder. Tap, tap, tap. It mirrored his own pace, in perfect sync. Not too fast, not too slow. Tom's heart began to pound harder in his chest, but he couldn't stop. Couldn't bring himself to slow down again. What if it was just someone else, another jogger out at this hour? Maybe someone was out there, following the same path. Still, the feeling of being watched lingered, thick and suffocating. The next morning, it happened again. And the morning after that. Every day, without fail, the footsteps followed him. They weren't loud, but they were unmistakable. Closer each time, just out of his sight, echoing in the back of his mind like a threat he couldn't ignore. Tom tried to dismiss it. He rationalized it as the woods playing tricks on him again, his mind creating things that weren't there. He made excuses. Maybe it was a deer or some other animal. Maybe it was just the uneven ground playing tricks with his ears. But there was something wrong. About it. One morning, when the mist seemed to cling tighter than usual, Tom stopped mid-run. The sound stopped with him. His heart raced and his breath caught in his throat as he slowly turned his head, scanning the path behind him. There was no one, no figure, nothing at all, but the air felt heavy, the silence thicker. The woods, which had once been his refuge, felt like a place of confinement. He continued his jog, but the footsteps resumed, perfectly timed with his own. It wasn't just the sound anymore. It was the presence, the sensation that someone, or something, was there, just behind him. He couldn't see it, couldn't touch it, but it was there, close enough that he could feel it with every step. The next morning, Tom slowed down, purposefully. He waited for the sound. It took a few seconds, but there it was. Tap, tap, tap. He stopped completely. The moment he did, it stopped too. A chill crawled down his spine. He wasn't imagining this anymore. This wasn't just a shadow of sound. This was something real. He picked up his pace, willing himself to ignore it. But the steps kept matching his. A relentless, haunting rhythm. By the fourth day, Tom's nerves were on edge. The footsteps were louder now, sharper, closer. He could feel them creeping up behind him, just a breath away from his back. He turned, but again, nothing. The path was empty. The next morning, he arrived at the trailhead as usual, his legs aching, his mind filled with the dread he could no longer deny. This time, he didn't run. Instead, he walked, listening intently. The footsteps came, just as they always did. But today, there was something new. A whisper. Tom. His name. Soft. Almost affectionate. The voice was a thin, delicate sound, like a memory half forgotten but so familiar. His heart hammered against his ribs. He stopped dead in his tracks. The woods were silent, unnaturally still. His skin tingled. The whisper seemed to come from all around him. He wasn't alone. Tom. This time, the footsteps didn't follow him. They led the way. As he stood frozen in place, the faint sound of someone or something walking ahead of him echoed from the mist. It was the same rhythmic tap, 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 only now it was growing louder, clearer. Tom hesitated for a moment, but then his legs, against his will, carried him forward. The whispering voice seemed to beckon, pulling him through the fog, further into the woods. And then he saw it. A figure stood at the end of the path, its back to him, waiting. It was vague, indistinct, like a shadow caught in the edge of his vision. But he knew, deep down, that it was waiting for him. His breath hitched. The air was thick, heavy with something he couldn't name. The figure turned slightly, and for a moment, Tom saw the outline of a face. Too familiar, too close. The footsteps stopped. Tom's body froze. There was no escape. The figure stepped forward, its eyes locked with his, and as it did, the last whisper drifted into his ear. Your turn. Story number 2. Gina had always found peace in the quiet morning runs around the old reservoir. The mist that hovered over the water at dawn, the soft rustling of the trees, the rhythmic pounding of her feet on the worn trail. Everything about. It felt familiar and safe. It was her escape, a ritual she could rely on to clear her mind. It had been this way for years, but this morning felt different. The fog was thicker than usual, swirling around her like a blanket that wouldn't let go. She pulled her jacket tighter against her body and picked up her pace, the path ahead of her dissolving into nothingness. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches twisting overhead, black against the gray sky. For some reason, the woods felt closed off, almost claustrophobic. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. As she neared the first bend of the path, she noticed something odd. A signpost, one she passed countless times, was now reversed, the words facing away from her as if someone had turned it on purpose. It shouldn't have been like that. She was sure it had always faced the other way. She slowed for a moment, but only for a second. Probably just the fog, she muttered to herself, forcing a smile. It was nothing at all. She picked up her pace again, eager to finish the run and return home to warmth and normality. But the feeling of wrongness didn't go away. It lingered, creeping along the edges of her thoughts. A few minutes later, she reached the water's edge. The surface of the reservoir rippled strangely, the current moving in the opposite direction from what it should have been. It wasn't much, just a subtle shift, but it was enough to make her stop in her tracks. She stared at the water, the fog thickening around her, and for a brief moment she wondered if she had somehow crossed into another world. Shaking her head, she forced herself to move. Just keep running, she thought. It's fine. Just finish the loop and everything will be back to normal. But with each lap, the world around her shifted just a little more. The trees, which had once been familiar, now seemed to lean in closer, their shadows darker. The path felt narrower, tighter, as if it was closing in on her. She could swear that at the corner of her eye, she saw shapes moving in the mist, figures just beyond her reach, always just out of sight. Gina quickened her pace, her breaths sharp and uneven as she pushed herself harder, trying to outrun the growing unease that gnawed at her. She passed the signpost again. It was reversed once more. It hadn't changed, not really, but it felt different. This time, the letters on the sign were blurry, indistinct, like a dream fading from memory. Gina's stomach twisted. The reservoir was now eerily still. The water, no longer rippling, was a perfect mirror, reflecting the trees and sky like a flat, soulless surface. She tried not to look at it, tried to focus on the path ahead of her, but something about the stillness, the unnatural calm of the water, made her skin crawl. Gina's heart began to race and she picked up speed again, pushing herself through the fog, desperate to get out, to reach the end of the loop and return to the safety of home. But the world was slipping further from her, grasp becoming more and more unrecognizable with every step she took. The trees had shifted, their shapes now unfamiliar, almost alien. They reached out at odd angles, like twisted fingers trying to grab her, to pull her into the fog. The ground beneath her feet had become uneven, jagged, something she hadn't noticed before. Or maybe it hadn't been there. The path seemed to stretch on endlessly, winding in impossible directions. How had she ended up back here? She'd already passed this point. No, she hadn't. Gina stopped, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Her legs burned, but it wasn't the physical exhaustion that gripped her now. It was something else. Something colder, something that whispered to her from within the fog. She turned in a circle, her eyes darting around, her mind racing to make sense of what was happening. but nothing made sense. The world was warping, changing, slipping away from her grasp. The trees, the water, the very air around her, they felt wrong, like fragments of a memory that didn't belong. Then it hit her. She had been running in circles. Every time she thought she was nearing the end of the loop, she found herself back at the same place. The signpost was reversed again, the water still moving against the current, the path never ending. She had run this route countless times before, but now she realized she didn't know it at all. The woods had swallowed her up, twisted her path into a maze she couldn't escape. There was no way out, and then, as she turned to face the path ahead, she saw it. Or rather, she saw her. A woman standing by the water. She looked like Gina, dressed like her, with the same jogger's outfit, the same tired eyes. She was staring at her, staring with an expression that was both familiar and unfamiliar, a look of quiet sorrow mixed with something darker. Gina's blood ran cold. The woman, the other Gina, didn't move, didn't speak, but her gaze was enough. In that single glance, Gina understood. She wasn't running anymore. She was the ghost, the one who had always been here, the one who was haunting her own memory. Her breath hitched. The mist closed in. She had never left. Story number 3. Every morning, when the sun was still low and the world felt half asleep, Michael would lace up his shoes and hit the trail. The route around the park was familiar, comforting even. He had jogged this path for months now, the rhythm of his feet on the dirt trail a steady beat in his routine. The trees whispered in the wind, and the air was crisp, cool. It was his escape from everything. School, life, the noise, just him and the road. But lately, there had been something else. It started a few weeks ago. A slight feeling that something was off. At first, Michael dismissed it as his imagination. He thought it was nothing. A trick of the light, perhaps, or some odd shadow from the trees. But it kept happening. There was a boy with bright red hair, standing still at the edge of the trail, just off the beaten path. At first, Michael hadn't thought much of it. Maybe the kid was waiting for someone, or just standing there, lost in his own thoughts. He didn't think anything strange of it. But the next day, the boy was there again, a little closer. Just standing there, his wide, unblinking eyes fixed on Michael. It was unsettling, and the next day, he was closer still. Michael tried to shake it off. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe the boy was on his own morning run. Maybe he just happened to be out there too. But each day the boy grew closer, inching forward in a way that felt deliberate. That feeling in Michael's stomach, nervous, tight, began to grow. His feet carried him faster down the trail, his breath quickening, though he didn't know why. Something about the boy's stillness unsettled him, like the air itself was holding its breath. On the fourth day, as Michael rounded a bend, he saw the boy again. This time, the boy was right at the edge of the trail. His eyes, those wide, wide eyes, locked onto Michael as if they were pulling him in, digging into him. The boy's face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim morning light, and his hair was too bright, too red, standing out like flames against the gray fog. "Hey," Michael called, his voice tentative, unsure. The boy didn't move, didn't speak. Michael hesitated, but his curiosity outweighed his unease. "Are you lost?" he asked, his words barely breaking the silence around them. The boy didn't answer. His eyes remained fixed on Michael. but there was something different about them now. Something darker, colder. Michael shivered, his skin prickling as if a chill had passed through him. He took a step forward, then another. The boy didn't move, but Michael could feel the distance between them, slowly closing. Suddenly, the air grew frigid, the temperature dropping so quickly that it took his breath away. His teeth started to chatter, and his skin felt raw, as if the cold were sinking into his very bones. His heart began to race in his chest, and for the first time he wanted to run, to turn around and flee. But he couldn't. He had to know. He reached out, his hand trembling. The boy's eyes widened, and then, without warning, the boy vanished. One moment he was there, standing motionless, and the next, he was gone. Like he'd been swallowed up by the fog itself. Michael stood there, staring at the empty spot where the boy had been. The silence pressed down on him like a weight. The coldness lingered, thick and suffocating. His breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, and his heart pounded in his ears. He turned and began to run, faster than before, desperate to escape the chill, desperate to leave whatever strange thing had just happened behind him. But the sound of distant weeping, followed him. It was soft at first, like the faintest echo in the distance. But the more he ran, the closer it got. The weeping grew louder, sharper, until it was all around him. The sound, so raw and full of sorrow, felt like it was coming from inside his own head. Michael forced his legs to move faster, but the weeping wouldn't stop. It clawed at him, burrowing deep into his mind, filling his thoughts with an awful sadness that he couldn't shake. When he finally made it home, breathless and cold, he slammed the door shut behind him. His heart was still pounding, his body trembling. He tried to calm down, tried to tell himself it had been nothing, just a trick of the mind, but deep down, he knew it wasn't. Something had happened. Something was wrong. The next morning, Michael went out for his run, though his nerves were frayed. He kept telling himself it was just a coincidence, that the boy wouldn't be there, that it was all in his head. But when he reached the same spot on the trail, the air grew cold again. His heart clenched in fear, and there, just beyond the edge of the path, stood the boy. This time, the boy wasn't standing still. He was moving, running, right behind him. Michael's breath caught in his throat, and he forced himself to look back. The boy was gaining on him, his red hair like a flare in the fog. His eyes, those wide, unblinking eyes, never left Michael. The boy was running faster than he should have been able to, faster than a normal person could. He was coming for him, getting closer with every step. Michael's legs pumped harder, his breath coming in sharp, desperate gasps. He had to get away. He had to get away. But the sound of the boy's footsteps grew louder, echoing in the space behind him. Closer and closer. And Michael realized with a terrible clarity that there was no escaping him. Not anymore. The boy was already inside his head. Story number 4. Lisa had always loved running at night. There was something peaceful about it. The world seemed quieter, emptier. The streets, bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, felt like her own private track. The only sounds were the rhythm of her feet on the pavement and the distant hum of the city far behind her. She usually ran the same route through the empty streets, passing by quiet houses, closed shops, and the occasional parked car. It was always the same, and that was exactly how she liked it. There was comfort in routine, but tonight something felt different. It wasn't much at first, just a strange feeling she couldn't shake. Maybe it was the way the streetlights flickered as she passed beneath them, or the way the air felt unusually thick and damp. Lisa dismissed it, pressing on. Her mind was elsewhere, on the stresses of work, the loneliness of the evening, the things that filled her head during every run. Then it happened. As she was crossing the intersection near the diner, a car suddenly roared around the corner. It came out of nowhere, its headlights blinding. Lisa's heart slammed against her chest as she leaped to the side, just barely avoiding it. The car screeched past her, missing her by inches, the sound of its tires screeching on the wet pavement, ringing in her ears. She stood frozen for a moment, her heart pounding, trying to steady her breath. She was fine, unhurt. It was just a close call. That's all it was. Her hands shook as she wiped her damp palms against her leggings, trying to push the anxiety out of her chest. She took a deep breath and started running again, the shock of the moment fading into the background. But something stayed with her, the feeling that the night had shifted, just slightly. She couldn't quite put her finger on it. The first time it happened was when she passed a small corner shop. Its windows were dark, except for the faint glow from a lone streetlight spilling onto the sidewalk. As she jogged by, she caught a glimpse of herself in the window, just a flash of her figure moving past, a blur in the glass. But it was the look in the reflection that made her stop. Her reflection didn't match her pace. It was just a half step ahead, like it was running faster than she was. Its head slightly turned toward her. Lisa's stomach clenched. It wasn't just the position that unsettled her. It was the look in its eyes. Wide, pleading, desperate. She blinked, and it was gone. The reflection was gone, replaced by nothing but the empty window. She quickly looked away, telling herself it was nothing, just a trick of the light. But something in her gut twisted, and the air around her felt colder. She picked up her pace, trying to push the unease away. But as she ran, it happened again. The next time was at a puddle by the old bookstore. The water reflected the orange streetlights above, shimmering with the ripples of the rain that had fallen earlier in the evening. Lisa didn't notice it at first, but as she ran past, her gaze fell on the puddle. And there she was again, her reflection, looking back at her. But once again, it was wrong. Her reflection wasn't just a little ahead, like before. This time, it was moving independently. Its head turned, eyes staring at her with a look of distress, of hunger. The reflection grinned, a wide, unnatural grin. Lisa's pulse quickened, her breath caught in her throat. She stopped dead in her tracks. The reflection didn't stop. It kept running, and it kept looking back at her, its eyes wide and pleading. Lisa's heart pounded. The air around her was thick with something she couldn't name. She tried to step back, to move away from the puddle, but her legs felt heavy, like they were made of lead. Her reflection was already moving farther ahead, faster than she was, as if it knew she wouldn't follow. But she did. She didn't want to, but something was pulling her forward. She couldn't stop herself. Her feet carried her along, her mind screaming to turn back, but her body just kept going. The feeling of the reflection being one step ahead never left her. It was there, lurking in every window, in every puddle, in every darkened corner. Each time she saw it, it was a little closer to her. Its eyes grew darker, more desperate. The pleading turned to something else, something darker, and Lisa began to feel like she was the one left behind, watching her own reflection slip further and further out of reach. She couldn't shake it. Every corner she turned, every new street she ran, it was there, waiting for her. Her reflection, always ahead, always watching, always pleading. It wasn't her anymore. It was something else. Something that had followed her from that moment. The near miss with the car, the death she had narrowly avoided. Something had attached itself to her that night. Something that wanted to take her place. By the time Lisa reached the final stretch of her run, her body was trembling. Her eyes flicked to the windows, to the puddles, to every reflective surface she passed. She couldn't look away, and when she reached her front door, out of breath and shaking, she hesitated. Her hand was still on the doorknob, but she didn't want to turn it. She didn't want to face what was waiting for her on the other side. Because she knew her reflection wasn't just in the windows anymore. It was in the glass of her own front door. And this time, the reflection was staring at her with eyes full of rage. Story number 5. Mr. Hargrove was a man of routine. Every morning, before the world was fully awake, he laced up his worn sneakers, grabbed a water bottle, and made his way to the old cemetery. The path through the cemetery was narrow, lined with gravestones that tilted in different directions, as if they were struggling to keep their balance. The fog in the early morning clung to the grass like a shroud, thick and heavy, muffling the sound of his footsteps. For years, the cemetery had been his sanctuary. It was quiet, empty. Just him, the tombstones, and the slow, steady rhythm of his feet on the path. It wasn't just the peaceful solitude that kept him coming back every day. It was the memory of his childhood, of long summer days spent running through these very woods with a boy who had once been his closest friend. But those days were long gone. That boy, that friend, was buried here now, buried in the far corner of the cemetery, beneath a stone marker that Hargrove never let himself look at. It had been years since he'd even thought about the accident, about the day he'd left his friend to die. He'd pushed it all to the back of his mind, locked it away with the rest of his secrets. But something was different this morning. The fog seemed thicker than usual, and the silence around him felt oppressive, as though the very air was holding its breath. As Hargrove ran along the path, his breath coming in steady, measured gasps, he heard something. At first, he thought it was just the wind, a rustling in the trees, a shift in the branches. But then he heard it again. It was ragged, uneven, a breath that wasn't his own. Hargrove stopped, his heart skipping a beat. He looked over his shoulder but saw nothing. Only the silent graves, the mist swirling like ghosts. He told himself it was nothing, a trick of the wind. Maybe he was just tired, his mind playing tricks on him. But then he heard it again, closer this time. A ragged breath just behind him. His skin prickled. The air around him felt colder, as if the morning itself had turned and was watching him. He turned quickly, but again, nothing. No one. Only the graves, the mist, the old trees stretching their arms toward the sky. He started running again, faster this time, his heart pounding. The sound of his breath seemed to echo in the stillness of the cemetery, drowning out the world around him. But still, the sound of ragged breathing was there. It was following him. It wasn't until he reached the old oak tree, the one that had been there since he was a boy, that he heard it again. The breathing, now louder, deeper, closer. It was so close that he could almost feel it on his neck, could almost hear it in his own chest. It was as though it had been with him all along, waiting, biding its time. Hargrove stopped dead in his tracks, his breath coming in short, desperate gasps. And then, in the silence that followed, he heard something else. A whisper. His name. Hargrove. The sound was low, carried on the wind, but it was unmistakable. A voice he hadn't heard in decades. A voice from the past. His friend's voice. The one he had abandoned all those years ago. He remembered now. With a clarity that struck like a hammer, Hargrove remembered the day they had run through these woods as boys. How they had raced each other to the edge of the cemetery. How his friend had tripped and fallen. How Hargrove had watched him tumble down the hill. He remembered the sound of his friend's breath, ragged, painful as he tried to call for help. But Hargrove hadn't helped him. He hadn't even tried. He had run. He had run and left his friend there to die. And now, the sound of that same ragged breathing was following him again, just behind him, growing louder, closer. His pulse raced. He had to finish this. He had to run. But his legs felt heavy, like they were made of stone, his feet dragging against the path. The whisper came again, closer this time, as though it was right beside him. Hargrove, finish it. It was his friend's voice, but it wasn't just a voice anymore. It was a presence, an undeniable force that filled the air around him. Hargrove's chest tightened. He felt it now, a presence pressing against him, the weight of something that had never left, something that had followed him all these years. It wanted something from him. It wanted him to finish the race they had started as children. The ground beneath his feet seemed to shift, the path growing steeper, narrower. The trees closed in around him, their branches twisting like fingers, pulling him forward, dragging him into the fog. Hargrove's breath came in ragged gasps now, matching the breathing that had been following him. He turned again, but this time, he saw it. A figure, barely visible in the mist. A boy, no older than he had been all those years ago. His friend. His face pale, his eyes wide, pleading. The boy was running toward him, but he wasn't moving fast. He was just there, and his eyes, those eyes, locked onto Hargrove's, filled with desperation, with a deep, terrible need. Hargrove, the voice whispered again, the air around him growing cold. Finish it. Hargrove's heart pounded in his chest, and he knew with horrifying certainty what he had to do. He had to finish the race, the one he had abandoned all those years ago, the one that had never really ended. He turned and ran, faster than he ever had before, but the footsteps behind him, the ragged breathing, grew louder, closer, until it was all he could hear, all he could feel. The grave markers whispered his name, and the trees whispered too. Story number 6. Every morning at exactly 5:33 a.m., Ethan went for his run. It had become a habit over the past year, the quiet solitude of the small town streets comforting him. The town was sleepy, peaceful. Every house was still locked, in the haze of early morning, and the streets were empty, save for the occasional cat darting across the pavement. The cool morning air filled his lungs, the rhythmic sound of his sneakers against the pavement a steady beat in his mind. There was nothing to interrupt the flow, nothing to distract him from the quiet. Except for her. At first, he thought he was imagining it, just a shadow or a trick of the streetlights and mist. But day after day, at exactly 5:33 a.m., he saw her, a gaunt woman in old-fashioned clothes running ahead of him, her figure thin and frail, her pace faster than it should have been. Her dress, long and flowing, looked out of place in the modern town. Out of place, and yet so ordinary. It was the kind of dress he'd seen in old photographs, in black and white family albums. A dress from a time that no longer existed. She was always just ahead, her back turned to him as she ran, her hair wild in the wind. Ethan couldn't see her face, but there was something about the way she moved. Graceful, yet with an eerie, unsettling quality that made his pulse quicken. The first time he noticed her, he thought maybe she was just another jogger, someone out for an early morning run, but no one else seemed to notice her. It was strange. There were plenty of other joggers in the neighborhood, people walking their dogs, but none of them ever seemed to see her. No one ever looked her way. Curious, Ethan tried to ask a few townsfolk the next time he ran into them. He'd seen them walking to the coffee shop or out on their porches, and he asked casually, "Have you seen that woman? The one running down the street every morning?" They all grew silent. A quiet tension filled the air, and they looked away, not meeting his eyes. No one said a word. They just went about their business, as if he hadn't spoken at all. It was unsettling. There was something off about it, something he couldn't explain. Why were they acting like that? He was used to small-town people being friendly, welcoming, but this was different. This was a kind of fear that rippled just beneath the surface. The next morning, as he stepped out onto his usual route, he saw her again. 5:33 a.m. on the dot. The same woman running ahead of him, her pace swift, almost too fast to keep up with. Ethan's heart started to race and he began to pick up his pace, running faster, his breath quickening in the cool morning air. He wasn't sure why, but something about her presence filled him with a strange, undeniable urgency. He had to catch up. He had to see her face. And so, day after day, he pushed himself harder, running a little faster each time. The woman, always just ahead, always just out of reach. Sometimes she seemed to glide, like she was floating just above the ground. The hem of her old-fashioned dress swirling around her legs. Sometimes her steps were so light, he thought she might disappear at any moment. But she never did. Finally, after weeks of chasing her down the same empty streets, Ethan caught up. It happened one morning as the sun began to rise, casting a pale orange glow over the town. His legs were burning, his breath ragged, but he kept pushing forward. He was so close now, just a few yards behind her. He could feel the cold air, the mist that clung to the ground. And then, in one swift motion, he reached out, his hand almost touching the hem of her dress. And just like that, she vanished. He stopped dead in his tracks, confusion flooding his chest. One moment, she had been there, and the next, she was gone, leaving only the empty street and the dull, creeping fog. Ethan turned in a circle, scanning the street, but there was no sign of her. Nothing. His heart thudded in his chest, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened. What the hell had he seen? It couldn't have been a trick of the light, not like the others. No, this time, something was wrong. He stood still for a long moment, listening to the silence, the only sound the soft rush of his breath. And then, in the distance, just ahead, he heard a noise, distant, hollow, like the sound of earth being moved. He walked forward cautiously, the hairs on the back of his neck rising. He rounded the next corner and stopped. There, at the edge of the cemetery, was a freshly dug grave. The dirt had been disturbed, piled high beside the tombstone. The marker was new, the granite smooth and untouched by time, its letters sharp and clear. Ethan's pulse quickened as he stepped closer. Name carved into the stone stopped him cold. It was his own. Ethan stared at the stone, his legs suddenly weak beneath him. The name, the date, today's date, stared back at him, cold and unyielding. His breath caught in his throat, and for the first time in years, he felt truly afraid. The gravestone was for him. It was his. He backed away slowly, his mind spinning, unable to grasp what he was seeing. His feet stumbled and he turned to run, his breath coming in sharp, panicked gasps. But as he did, he heard it. A faint sound, like a woman's voice, calling his name. The same voice he had never heard before, but now it was unmistakable. Ethan. The air around him grew heavy, suffocating. The fog thickened, and as he looked back toward the cemetery, he saw the woman again. Her gaunt figure standing motionless at the edge of the grave. And this time, her face was clear. It was his own. Story number 7. Megan had always been a night person. The world seemed quieter at night, less demanding. The city lights outside her window twinkled like distant stars, and the streets were empty, waiting. It was during one of these quiet nights that she first saw the flyer for the midnight jogging group. "Join us for a run under the stars," it read in bold, mysterious letters. She'd never been one to shy away from something new, and the idea of running with a group appealed to her. She hadn't been exercising much lately, and this seemed like the perfect excuse to get out and do something different. She showed up at the starting point at midnight, her sneakers crunching on the cool, quiet pavement. A few other people had gathered, all standing in the shadow of the trees near the park's entrance. Megan gave them a tentative smile, but no one returned it. They just stood there, their faces blank, their eyes distant. A chill ran up her spine, but she shook it off. It was late. Everyone was probably just tired. One of the group members, a tall man with pale skin and dark hair, stepped forward. "Ready to begin?" His voice was soft, almost too soft, but his eyes had a strange intensity to them. Megan nodded, trying to ignore the creeping sense of unease that was beginning to settle over her. The group started running. The pavement beneath their feet seemed to echo in the silence of the night, and Megan fell into step with the others, trying to match their pace. As they ran, the city's lights faded into the background, swallowed by the darkness around them. The streets that had felt so familiar just moments ago were now foreign, empty. She glanced around, but the other runners were all too still. They were running, yes, but there was something wrong about the way they moved. Their strides were too smooth, their bodies too controlled, as if they didn't need to breathe. Megan pushed the thought aside. She was being silly. It was just a jog. But as the minutes passed, she began to notice more. The group never spoke. Not a word was exchanged between any of them. There was no casual chatter, no light-hearted comments about the weather or the route. Just the sound of feet hitting the pavement, soft and unbroken. And then there were their eyes. They were glassy, vacant, like the eyes of sleepwalkers or people lost in a trance. Every now and then, one of them would glance at her. But there was no warmth, no recognition, only that strange, glassy stare. Megan felt the discomfort creeping up her spine, but she tried to focus on the rhythm of her feet, on the steady thump of her heart. She wasn't going to let this weird group get to her. She'd just finish the run and be done with it. But as the miles passed, it became harder to ignore the growing unease. The night around her seemed to press in closer, the streets empty and silent, the air growing colder. The runners ahead of her never seemed to break their stride. No one slowed down. No one stopped. They were all just running. And Megan, despite the increasing discomfort, couldn't stop herself from running too. It was when she saw the group's leader turn down a darkened side street that the real unease hit. The street was narrow, lined with thick trees that blocked out most of the light. She couldn't even see the end of it, just a darkened void. Megan hesitated for a moment, her breath coming faster now, but the rest of the group continued forward without a second thought. The leader didn't look back. She didn't want to follow them. She had to get out. She had to leave. "I think I'm done," she called out, her voice louder than she intended. But no one answered. No one even reacted. The group continued, their pace unbroken, the leader at the front, his back straight and unbending. Megan felt her heart race. She stopped. "Hey!" she called again, this time with more force. "I'm not going down that road." The group slowed for just a second. Megan's heart pounded in her chest. Maybe they had heard her? But then, in a sudden movement, the runners shifted, closing in on her. It was so fast, so unnervingly fast that Megan didn't have time to react. Before she could even take a step back, the man with the dark hair appeared beside her. His face was too pale, his smile too thin. There was something wrong with the way. His mouth twisted upward, something inhuman about it. "You can't leave," he said, his voice quiet and soft. His smile never reached his eyes. "We've been waiting for you." Megan's stomach turned over. She stepped back, her feet stumbling. "I'm leaving now," she said, her voice shaking. But she wasn't sure if she believed herself. She wasn't sure she could even move. But the others, there were no words, no force to stop her. They just stood there, watching her, their eyes glassy and fixed. Megan turned to run, but the moment she moved, they moved too. Like shadows, they closed in on her, guiding her deeper into the night, down the street that no longer seemed like a street, but a tunnel. Long, endless, stretching, forever. She tried to push forward to break away, but the cold air wrapped around her like a shackle, pulling her back. The world behind her, the city, the lights, everything she had known, was vanishing. Fading into the night, swallowed by darkness. The runners didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their thin, hungry smiles told her everything she needed to know. They weren't running with her, they were running her down. And no matter how fast she ran, they were always just behind her, always just a step away. Story number 8. Porter's Hill had always been a part of the town's folklore, an old, crumbling hill that towered above the quiet streets, looming like a forgotten monument to something dark and ancient. Every jogger in town knew better than to run up it after sunset. It wasn't just the steep incline or the thick trees that made the path up Porter's Hill a challenge. It was the air that settled over it as the sun dipped below the horizon. There was something oppressive about the place, something that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. But Nick was cocky. He was new to the town, just moved in last month. The other joggers, those who had been there for years, avoided the hill once the light started to fade, mumbling half-hearted warnings under their breath. "Don't run after dark," they said, their eyes glancing nervously at the hill, as if just mentioning it would summon something that was better left forgotten. Nick wasn't afraid. He didn't believe in the stories, the superstitions, the whispers. He thought it was just a part of small-town life, the kind of thing people told their children to keep them in line. Besides, he was a serious runner. Porter's Hill was the ultimate challenge, and Nick liked challenges. The air was cooler up there. The view was unmatched, and he knew he could push himself. He had to. So, one evening, long after the sun had set, Nick decided to run it. The streets below were quiet, the houses dark, with only the dim glow of streetlights to guide his way. The hill stood at the edge of town, the path leading into the shadow of trees and underbrush where the streetlights couldn't reach. He started up, his feet pounding against the dirt trail, his breath steady and measured. At first, it felt like any other run. The quiet of the night wrapped around him and the darkness grew deeper with every step. He didn't think twice. He pushed himself harder, faster, feeling the burn in his legs, the cool night air rushing past him. The sound of his own breath was the only thing that filled his ears. But as he neared the top, something changed. The air grew colder, unnaturally so, and the path seemed to narrow. The trees around him closed in, their twisted branches reaching out like skeletal hands. He slowed down, glancing over his shoulder. But the town was already far behind him, shrouded in darkness, the lights dimming to nothing. He was alone now, alone with the hill. When Nick finally reached the crest, he stopped. The view was nothing like he expected. There was no sweeping panorama of the town below. Instead, there was a clearing, and in that clearing stood a group of figures, silent, still. The figures were dressed in dark clothes, their bodies rigid and unmoving, their faces obscured in shadow. Nick's heart skipped a beat, his instincts screaming at him to turn around to run back down the hill, but there was something about them, something compelling, that made him stay. They stood there like statues, their postures so precise, so unnatural, as if they were waiting. And then, one by one, they began to turn toward him. Their faces were blurred, smeared as if someone had taken an eraser to them. Their features were indistinct, shifting and twisting like a fading memory. The closer he looked, the less they seemed to be people at all. They weren't human anymore. They were something else, something old, something forgotten. The figures extended their hands toward him, motioning for him to come closer. Nick hesitated, but there was a strange pull in the air, an undeniable force that made his legs move forward before he could stop them. As he stepped closer, he could feel the weight of their gaze on him, pressing down on him. He was caught in something beyond his understanding, something that wanted him to stay. He took a tentative step toward them, then another, and as he did, he felt it. The change. His body tingled, and then his face. His face began to blur. His reflection, in the figure's eyes, his own image, rippled like a distorted mirror. His features, his eyes, began to shift and fade, just like the others. His limbs felt heavier, and the world around him seemed to sink deeper into shadow. His heart began to race, panic rising in his chest. "What's happening?" he thought, but the words felt distant, like someone else's thoughts. He tried to call out, but his voice caught in his throat, swallowed by the thick air around him. And then he realized the figures weren't waiting for him. They weren't asking him to join them. They were him. They were shadows of people who had once stood where he was, once run where he was running. The hill kept them. It kept them in the dusk, kept them running, forever. His breath grew shallow, his body freezing in place. He tried to move, to turn, but his feet were rooted to the ground. The night closed in around him, and the figures drew closer, their hands outstretched, their faces still smudged and fading. And as they reached for him, Nick felt his own face vanish. his features swallowed by the dark, just like theirs. His legs, once strong and sure, now moved only with the will of the hill, carrying him deeper into the shadow. The last thing he heard was the soft, distant sound of footsteps. His own, blending with the others, echoing in the darkness forever. Story number 9. Sam had always enjoyed his morning runs, especially when it rained. There was something about the solitude, the rhythm of his feet hitting the wet pavement, and the scent of fresh rain that made the whole world feel quieter. The city was still sleeping, and he had the streets to himself, just the steady sound of his breath and the occasional passing car. He usually ran the same route, through the quiet neighborhood and then down to the old iron bridge that spanned the creek. The bridge was an old relic, its rusted beams sagging under the weight of time. It wasn't a pretty bridge, but it was familiar, and that was what mattered to Sam. He'd run under it countless times without a second thought. But this morning, something felt different. The rain had come down harder than usual, and the creek beneath the bridge had swelled, its murky water rushing with a force Sam wasn't used to. As he approached the bridge, his foot splashed in a puddle, sending a cold spray up his leg. He barely noticed, lost in the quiet of the morning. But when he looked down at the water, he saw something. A handprint. It was small, too small to be his own. It was pressed into the muddy water, its edges blurred as though the hand had been dragged through the muck. Sam stopped in his tracks, staring at it. The print was faint, the water swirling around it, but it was unmistakable. A child's hand, its fingers splayed, its palm open as if reaching for something. He frowned. A trick of the light, he thought, or maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. It had rained heavily overnight, and the water could have shifted things. He was being silly. He had no reason to be alarmed. Sam shook his head, dismissing it. He took a few more steps under the bridge, but then something caught his eye. Another print, and then another, leading off the trail and into the thick undergrowth that lined the creek. His pulse quickened. The prints were smaller than the last, scattered now across the muddy earth, like someone, or something, had walked in the rain, its hands pressed to the ground, leaving traces behind. He paused, unsure what to make of it. The path under the bridge was quiet, the sound of the creek louder now, the rain steady against the pavement. It wasn't like him to get distracted by something so strange, so insignificant. But for some reason, he couldn't look away. He took another step, his feet drawn almost unwillingly toward the prints. They led into the undergrowth, where the trees grew thick and tangled, and the light from the morning seemed to fade, swallowed by the shadows of the branches. Sam hesitated again, a knot of unease twisting in his stomach. Just finish the run, he told himself. You're being ridiculous. But each day after that, the prints appeared again, always leading him the same way, off the trail and into the tangle of brush toward the dark, wet woods. They were always faint at first, but by the third day they were unmistakable, leading him deeper into the undergrowth to a place where the trees blocked out the sky and the air grew damp and cold. Sam couldn't ignore them anymore. Something about the handprints, the way they appeared each time it rained, pulled at him. They felt wrong, like something was trying to tell him something. Every time he looked at the prints, his chest tightened. His steps became hesitant, unsure, as though something were waiting for him just beyond the trees. The dreams started soon after. The first one was soft, faint, like a whisper in his mind. He saw himself running under the bridge, just as he had done before, But this time, the handprints were more vivid. They were there, reaching out to him, their fingers stretched wide, the same as the ones he'd seen on the muddy water. And then, the sound of splashing water filled his ears, like something struggling. He saw it. Someone, a child, floating in the water, their body limp. Their arms reached toward him, their face distorted in desperation. Sam's heart pounded as the figure called to him. "Run with me," the voice whispered, a soft, breathless plea that echoed in his head. "Don't leave me." He woke up, gasping, drenched in sweat. The words from the dream clung to him, cold and lingering, even as the morning sunlight pushed through his window. The next day, Sam ran again. The prints were still there, leading off the path. They were clearer now, more defined. There was no denying them. He couldn't stop himself. He followed them. The undergrowth seemed even denser than before, the branches reaching out to catch at his clothes, the damp earth soft beneath his feet. But still he pressed on, his legs moving faster, driven by something deep in his gut, something he couldn't name. He was too close now, and then he saw it. The water, black and thick, pooled in a hollow beneath the trees. In the center, a small figure was submerged, the water swarming with ripples around it. A child, its face pale and empty, eyes wide and staring. And there, beside it, was the handprint, clear as day, pressed into the muddy water. Sam's breath hitched. He tried to turn, to run back, but the sound of the voice, desperate and soft, filled his ears again. "Run with me. Don't leave me." Before he could react, the water surged and the ground beneath him seemed to shift. He stumbled, the world spinning, and when he looked back toward the trail, the path was gone. The trees, the brush, everything had vanished. There was only the dark water, swirling around him, pulling him under. The next morning, the rain came again, and Sam never returned. Story number 10. When Mark moved to the small town, he was looking for peace, a quiet place to start over. The city had worn him down. Too much noise, too many faces, too many distractions. He found a small apartment on the outskirts of town and decided to get back into the routine he had neglected for too long. Running, his old release. It was a habit he'd had since college, a way to clear his head, to think. Every morning, before the sun was fully up, Mark laced up his shoes and headed out. The streets were empty, the world still quiet, and it felt like he had the town to himself. He ran the same route through the park, past the familiar trees, the old benches, and the long stretches of empty sidewalk. It was on the second morning that he first saw him. Another jogger, running in the opposite direction, passed by Mark. He was older, maybe in his late 40s, but fit. His stride was steady, his pace relaxed, and as he got closer, Mark gave him a friendly nod. It was a small town, and there was something about the stillness of the early morning that made everyone feel like part of the same world. The man smiled at Mark as they crossed paths, a warm, welcoming grin that felt natural enough. Mark returned, the smile, the kind of gesture that felt almost like an unspoken bond between two strangers, both out for the same reason: peace. It wasn't anything unusual, nothing to be concerned about. The next morning, Mark went out again, and there he was. Same man, same route, same smile. This time, Mark noticed something. The smile seemed off, just a little. It was wider than before, a little too wide, stretching across his face, but it was still a smile. Nothing to worry about, Mark told himself. just a trick of the light. Mark smiled back, thinking maybe it was just his imagination. The jogger nodded, his eyes bright, and they continued on their separate ways. But the third morning was different. As Mark ran, he caught sight of the man again. He was ahead this time, already on his way back, and as they passed each other, the smile was even wider. Mark noticed with a growing sense of discomfort that his teeth were more visible now. Too many teeth, sharp and even, stretching unnaturally across the man's face. It was as though the smile had become distorted. Mark's heart beat a little faster, a tiny ripple of unease crawling up his spine. But he nodded again, forced a smile, and kept running. He told himself it was just a strange feeling. Nothing more. But that night, Mark's dreams were unsettling. He found himself running through long, dark corridors. The walls were thick and soft, like flesh, and as he ran, they seemed to pulse with each step. He turned corners, but the corridor stretched out endlessly. Every direction felt wrong. The air was thick, suffocating, and the smell was heavy, like something alive, something ancient. And then he heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, then louder. It was close, surrounding him, coming from all directions. It was a laugh Mark knew, but not from any face, not from any person he could remember. It was a laugh that felt familiar. And then he saw them. Mouths everywhere. They appeared in the walls, in the shadows. Endless rows of mouths, opening and closing like a chorus of hungry things, all laughing, all waiting. The laughter grew, louder, more frantic, and the mouths started to chase him, following him down the corridors. Mark woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. His heart hammered in his chest. The remnants of the dream lingered in his mind. Those teeth, those mouths, that laughter. He couldn't shake it. It felt real, more real than any dream he'd ever had. The next morning, Mark decided to shake it off. He couldn't let some strange dream get to him. So he went out again, hoping for some sense of normalcy. And there he was again. The man, the jogger. He was waiting for Mark at the same spot. But this time, Mark didn't just pass him. The man fell into step beside him, matching his pace effortlessly, his footfall silent on the pavement. The smile was back, wider than ever, stretching. Across his face, almost grotesque now. His eyes, though, gleamed in the early light, bright and unblinking. Mark tried to speed up, but the jogger stayed with him, always just a step ahead, always just enough to make Mark uneasy. He could feel the man's presence beside him, like a weight, like something pressing in on him. "Hello, again," the man said, his voice smooth, warm, but there was something underneath it, something that chilled Mark to the core. "How's the run today?" Mark couldn't speak. His mouth was dry. The smile on the man's face seemed to grow even wider, stretching across his face almost uncomfortably so, as though it would split his head open. The air around them felt thick, heavy. Mark's heart pounded in his chest as he tried to move faster, but the man was still there, always beside him, always smiling, his teeth gleaming in the morning light. Mark's legs felt heavy, sluggish, as though the weight of the man's presence was dragging him down. He tried to pull away, but the man's smile only widened, his teeth sharp and gleaming. The last thing Mark heard before he turned to run was the man's voice, soft and sweet, as if whispering in his ear. "Don't leave. You're not running alone anymore." Mark turned to look at him, and for a split second, his reflection was there. Staring back at him from the man's eyes, his own face twisted into the same unnatural grin. And Mark understood. he would never run alone again. Are you ready to get your heart racing? Watch these chilling jogging horror stories that will make you rethink your morning run. Don't just run. Run to the unknown, to the chilling whispers and figures that haunt every step. Hit the subscribe button and never miss a terrifying tale. Like and share if you dare to run with us. And if you've had a creepy encounter while jogging, drop a comment below and share your experience.